Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting for Calaveras County. Just so everybody's aware, we have opened up the courtroom next door with audio and live television. So for the overflow, we can have folks go into our courtroom located to my right, which will be right over there, and they'll be able to monitor the proceedings and still have enough seating for everybody. Okay, Madam Clerk.
Item 1 is a closed session agenda, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2.
At this time, we'll have public comment on item 1 of the closed session. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll adjourn to closed session. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting, October 17th. At this time, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Supervisor Mill, would you lead us?
Let's begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk.
Report of closed session. Conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2. There was no reportable action, and the board may reconvene into closed session during lunch.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ladies and gentlemen, today's going to be a very important day. I would like to elicit all your cooperation in making this a very productive hearing. Also to remind everybody, staff, board, and our friends out here, that we are going to be showing respect to everyone. Our speakers, our public, our staff, and our board. I am going to commit to making this meeting run very productive and respectful. I would solicit your cooperation to make that happen. We do have auxiliary seating next door. We have audio visual. You can hear us. You can see us if you're in the next courtroom. If you desire to speak during a public comment period, and if you're in the other courtroom, would you please come to the foyer? And once again, we want to maintain a safe aisleway here, and enter the chambers and stand in line, no more than 5 people, please, so you have an opportunity to public address the board and this meeting. Is there any questions by staff? Any questions by board? Seeing none, we'll proceed. Madam Clerk.
Announcements. This meeting may be continued to Wednesday, October 18th, 2017 at 9 a.m. if not completed today.
Okay. Is there any announcements by staff or by the Board of Supervisors?
Mike, you make mention of the phone.
Oh, sorry, Sheriff. Ladies and gentlemen, apparently in the women's bathroom there was a cell phone left in there. It is now missing. So if you're missing your cell phone and you were in the ladies' bathroom, your cell phone is unknown where it's at. So.
No, she knows it's missing.
Oh, she knows it's missing. We just don't know where it's at. Okay. So if anybody starts ringing out there, make sure it's your cell phone. Okay. Madam Clerk.
Public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard.
Okay, so everybody's clear. This is the general public comment period. This is the time to bring up any topic that is not on today's agenda, on the regular agenda. There'll be another item, specific public comment period, for each item on the agenda. I want everybody to understand that we want to stay focused on each individual item as we discuss it as a board and as this hearing progresses. That's on the regular agenda. Well, apparently on this agenda, we have no consent agenda. We do have a consent? All right. Please wait till we get to that item-specific public comment period so you can speak specifically to that period, to that issue. I know it's going to be a little tough to kind of separate these issues, and we'll try to make the best of this as we can. I will be commenting if we see somebody drifting off, and that'll be an inquiry comment to find out where your train of thought's going. Okay, do we understand that? Thank you. Public comment, first to speak. Hello, Marty.
Good morning, Marty Crane. First, I wanted to say that we all know we have lots of challenges going on, but there are lots of wonderful, positive things that happen. And one thing I want to share is that the Volunteer Center has been developing a community volunteer campus for a couple of years now, several years now. And thank you, Supervisor Tofinelli, for coming to our 4-day open house and checking it all out. It's if anyone knows the story of Stone Soup, this is Stone Soup on steroids. It is phenomenal, and it's a wonderful resource for our community, built by and with and through the community. We always say that when the community comes together and really puts their minds to things, magic happens. Magic can happen in all areas. So I wish us luck today. But also, I also wanted to say kudos to our county, our public, our board, for the compassionate and thoughtful recognition in recent weeks on our breast cancer awareness. If anyone hasn't seen that presentation, please go back and watch it. Get a box of tissues. It's wonderful. We can fix anything. We can fix everything if we do it together. And then also last week, I wasn't able to be here. I was supposed to receive the resolution on bullying, but I couldn't be here because I was at a Red Cross shelter. So was Jack. But I watched it on television, and kudos to Bonnie, to our HR, to Janice, to Jack for expanding on that issue. And the one issue that I, after having been in this room since 2002 for almost every meeting except for recently when I've had a tool belt on, I've seen the public bully the board. I've seen the certain board members bully other board members. And so we know what that looks like. If you think 3 votes is all you need, 3 votes means that you win that day. You personally win that day. Doesn't mean we win. That means we need more conversation. And some people have said, well, we talk things to death and we never do anything. Well, we kick the can down the road a lot. But we need serious consistent conversations and policies that we all really, truly respect. So anyway, good luck to all of us. Let the magic happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invoke our clapping clause here. I can do this, but I can't do this. Not today. Bonnie, how are you?
Good morning, Board. Bonnie Newman from Double Springs. Today I'm talking as a taxpayer and an IHSS home care provider. I'm going to speak of the plight of the IHSS home care provider in Calaveras County. There's approximately 335 of us. We work about 500,000 hours a year, costing the state, federal, and local governments over $5 million. Only 64 of our 335 have the most minimal health insurance, partially paid by the member themselves. There's no sick leave, vacation leave to speak of. And for family members that care for a loved one in their own home, they don't get any Social Security benefits. None is taken out, and they could work 30, 40 years, and they have nothing when they end up losing their client or having a stroke themselves. Our last contract was negotiated in 2007 with a one-year extension. It expired in 2010. Our last increase was a minimum wage bump last January, and before that, our last wage increase was in 2009. How would you all like to be working for the same wages you made in 2009? The average home care worker works about 25 to 30 hours a week. Their average paycheck is between $1,000 and $1,200 a month. And some workers with protective supervision are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's a new requirement that the federal government is laying on home care workers that is designed to dismantle the program even further than the cuts. And it's going to require something called EVV, Electronic Visit Validation, which means home care workers are going to be required every time they change a service component to phone in somewhere and document how much time is being spent on which task, and how is that going to be accomplished to people that don't have cell phones, that don't have computers, or don't have any of the technical things that they're going to be requiring home care workers to have in order to provide the most basic services to keep a client in their home rather than a facility where their average length of life is 13 months. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Janice Bassett from Valley Springs. And I just want to kind of piggyback on what Marty Crane said about the Volunteer Center. It is just incredible what's been created by the community. And if you haven't seen it yet, you really need to go. It's wonderful. And there's just so many potential things for our community to happen there. It's just incredible. So to further that cause, I want to tell everybody about the Calaveras Family Showcase that is going to be at the Metropolitan here in San Andreas, that is going to support the brand new Volunteer Center and the Valley Springs Youth and Family Center. And our friend Gary is going to do the lights and the sound. And it's just a wonderful show. And if you come, be sure to bring plenty of tissues to catch all the tears of laughter and joy, because you're going to love it. And I have tickets with me, so if you want tickets, let me know. And I also want to mention about the fires. My daughter had to evacuate Santa Rosa, and she fled to her father-in-law's house in Boulder Creek, and now Boulder Creek is on fire. So I know that we all know how devastating that is. So just keep them in your minds. And good luck to us all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Board. I'm not sure if you want to go over that right now. That is a little sheet I made up after receiving 196 denial letters from the registration program. If you look at that, you'll see that 22 people couldn't put a sign up and were denied. Do you want me to stop on that? No problem. Anyway, on another note, I'll let you look over that. If I can go back to that, I will. I hope you all realize we're all naked today. They have hacked the Wi-Fi networks. Every one of us is exposed. Cisco, Microsoft, IBM, Apple, every operating system that we have today is now exposed to the hackers. All of your information, public and private, is now available on the web by a simple hack into your Wi-Fi network. Your personal, your county business is on the international web. So if I can go back to the denials, I mean, you saw that? No?
Let's stay on topic.
Okay. Anyway, I think we need to look into our own personal stuff and resecure. There's going to be patches. If you have a home network, you need to make sure that your home network is up to date and you install that patch on your nice little Wi-Fi network. Your router is now exposed. Basically, all of our information is out there for anybody to get. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Hello, Joe.
Joan Wilson, District 1. CDC states that 88,000 deaths and 2.5 million years of potential life loss each year from 2006 to 2010, 4 years, shortening the lives that died by the average of 30 years. This is alcohol, gentlemen. National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, youths 12 to 17 years old, 623,000 had alcohol use disorder. 2014, alcohol-impaired driving fatalities, 9,967 deaths, 31% overall driving fatalities. 20+% of age 12 to 20 reported binge drinking in the past month. 10% of children live with a parent with alcohol problems. That's from 2012. Alcohol effects, heart, cardiomyopathy, arrhythmias, stroke, high blood pressure, fatty liver, alcohol, hepatitis, fibrosis, cirrhosis, pancreatitis, cancer of the mouth, esophagus, throat, liver, breast. Your immune system is diminished. Women who consume 8 or more drinks per week are considered excessive drinkers. And for men, excessive is defined as 15 or more drinks a week. The researchers define a drink as just 5 ounces of wine, 12 ounces of beer, or 1.5 ounces of spirits. This was taken from November 20th, 2014, from npr.org. It also has it on WebMD and other sites. Tobacco, health risks. Smoking cigarettes kills more Americans than alcohol, car accidents, HIV, guns, and illegal drugs combined. Smokeless tobacco is associated with many health problems. Using smokeless tobacco can lead to nicotine addiction, causes cancer of the mouth, esophagus, and pancreas. Associated with diseases of the mouth, it can increase risk for early delivery and stillborn or stillbirth when used during pregnancy. Can cause nicotine. Gentlemen, I think if you want to get rid of some very dangerous drugs in this county, this might be where you want to start. Okay? There's a liquor store right across the street from high school. How is it that we can have this? After all, the high school students could walk into that liquor store and steal liquor. Much easier than they can walk onto my farm. But I think maybe there's a point of
Thank you, Jo.
starting here. Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Gary Lewis, Mountain Ranch. I want to address an issue that was discussed and decided upon on the last meeting, August 22. My concern is that this issue still exists. Nothing has been done about the 85+% crops growing on that property. I've included in the
Mr.
papers
Lewis,
that you
Mr.
received.
Lewis, are we going to be talking about marijuana?
I am not talking about marijuana.
I'll let you continue until the point where it does. Go ahead, sir.
Did I get my couple of seconds back?
Sure.
Thank you. My concern is the regulations that were totally ignored in the development of this property. The concern is that the rest of us in the county follow the codes and regulations of the county. This whole process, to me, in the discussions and the hearings, has the smell of political cronyism to me. There should be, in fact, a cease and desist order issued to the property owner immediately. As the violations continue, the rest of us comply. Owing to the deliberate and long-going and current out-of-compliance violations of the Calaveras County zoning requirements, that this situation still exists, I ask the board why. I've already stated how it exists. It's improper. Why has the Board of Supervisors or other regulatory agencies not addressed these violations? And how can any future code violations be addressed?
Mr. Lewis, in reference to your document, you're talking about water table. That's what we're...
No, I'm talking about the water table as well as the amount of growth on that property. Primarily, the most of the property is taken up by vineyards.
You can continue, sir.
Thank you. When I first became aware of the property on the corner of Michael and Cave City Road, I like wine. My wife and I drink wine. We enjoy wine. I assumed mistakenly that this was all legal and proper and permitted until an application for rezoning to rural agricultural was submitted. We were notified. That's the bulk of the first 2 pages that are in my papers I supplied today. There's no regulation, apparently, being applied to this property. It still exists there. That's how I became aware of it. I sense that the will to enforce a regulation is failing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fry, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Board of Supervisors. I'm here this morning as a member of the Commission on Aging, and I would like to thank Susan Tomasic as the chair of the this year's Senior Volunteer of the Year for her outstanding contribution to chairing that took place. Uniquely this year, we nominated, there were 18 nominees that came in. And of the 18 nominees, we decided on four awards. Senior Male Volunteer of the Year, Senior Female Volunteer of the Year, the Outstanding Achievement of the Year Award and Couple of the Year Award. And what was interesting, out of those 18, each one of those were a unanimous vote. And we held a luncheon out at Dodasa Ranch out by Burson. And I would like to especially thank Supervisor Toffanelli and Chair Michael Oliveira for attending that. I had checked with the other supervisors, and they were already committed to meetings, and I appreciate them sharing that with me. So I think it was a great day had by all, and I want to thank both of you supervisors for attending that luncheon. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Fry. Is there any other public comment? Anybody in the other courtroom? If you wish to speak during public comment, you can approach the main chamber now. Morning, how are you?
Good morning. Quote, or unquote, the Men's Journal November 2017 issue on page 97 says that the opioid pandemic killed 160 people per day, and it could claim 500,000 lives over the next 10 years, unquote. Quote, girls are selling blowjobs for the price of a bag of dope, unquote. On page 97, quote, statute says if you sell a controlled substance and it causes someone's death, you face 20 years to life, unquote. The DEA goes across state lines, and we are not exempt. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gents.
Good morning.
Hi, I'm Eloisa. I'm from Rancho Calaveras. I'd like to talk to you, Clyde Clapp. What do you plan to do with the crime rate in Rancho Calaveras?
Point of order, Chair.
I'll hear your point of order.
Mr. Clapp is not within the subject matter jurisdiction of this board.
The crime rate is really high in Calaveras, Rancho.
Ma'am, just let me rule on that, please. Your intent is to address what issue, ma'am?
The crime rate, the crimes that's going on, the thievery that's going on in Rancho Calaveras. In Rancho Calaveras, I have 4 tires ripped off of my car. Not the rims, the tires, the brakes.
Okay, I'll allow you to continue.
And there was fingerprints taken. It's like, it's not a big deal.
Ma'am,
Okay.
I'll allow you to continue on the crime rate, and I'll give you your time back.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and that's why I want to talk to Clyde Clapp, because isn't he my district supervisor in Rancho Calaveras?
You can continue, ma'am.
Okay, so 2 houses down, CCWD truck gets stolen out from the front of that house. That wasn't the first time that truck was broken into. That truck was broken into several times when the guy had another utility truck. It's constantly broken into. Just on Gardner Place alone, there has been so many houses broken into in the last few years. You can't blame it on the farms. You can't blame it on pot. I'm telling you, it needs to be addressed, and it's like nothing is happening. It's no big deal, but it's our stuff. We work hard for our stuff. You know, I can't afford to go out and buy tires and rims and brakes for my car. You know, I want to know what's your plans? What are you doing? Have you heard about the crime rate in your district? Please, I'm talking to you. Can you please answer me?
Ma'am,
I'm just asking
Ma'am,
a question.
Ma'am, could you hold for a moment? What's your point of order, ma'am?
Should this not be directed to the sheriff?
Ma'am, it's
Why?
public...
He's my
Folks,
supervisor.
Hey, hold on a minute, please. Let me answer her first.
Thank you.
It's a crime problem, and it's to the Board of Supervisors, and she can speak on this item as long as she stays within the boundaries of the crime problem. Sheriff is here, public is here, and it's her right to have public comment.
The
You can
sheriff.
you can continue on the crime,
That's where I'm at.
and stay focused on the crime.
and I am, because
Give her
I'm
time
very,
back,
I'm
please.
very focused on the crime. I have video cameras out in front of my house. I videoed that truck driving off. You know, nobody came and wanted to see the video, wanted to see the person walking up to it. You know what the answer was? Oh, it must have been some drunk walking down the street. What bar is close to Gardner Place? If you're drunk and you're leaving the range, which would be closest to me, would you walk all the way to Gardner Place, steal that utility truck because you're drunk and you need a ride home? It's like it downplays all that stuff. And I just want to live in a safe neighborhood. I lived in that neighborhood for 17 years. And just recently, within the last 4 years, the crime rate is just going out of control, and it just seems like it's not being taken care of. It's not being taken seriously. You know, I don't want to be a hootin' tootin' gun holder thing. I'm not like that. But I want to be safe. And I want you to say, hey, I want to do something to make you guys safe. You know, I want to be able to go out in my house at midnight if I want and not worry about somebody's going to attack me or whatever. Come on, I live in rural California. That's something you worry about when you live in Stockton, L.A., San Francisco. I shouldn't have to worry about that here. But nobody cares.
Thank you, ma'am.
I can see you care.
Thank you.
The board usually doesn't respond to public comment, but since chairs choose to let it happen, I would advise a person to contact the sheriff's office because that's where it is. The board does not enforce the law of the county. We make the law. And I hope the sheriff directs the people next time to that.
Okay. Next speaker.
Good morning. My name is Raymond Smith, the lobbying director with Calaveras Normal. I'm from Valley Springs. I'd like to speak to the central meaning of Republican government, which is popular sovereignty. I have a few quotes from Ronald Reagan, former President Ronald Reagan. Government is like a baby, an elementary canal with a big appetite at one end and no sense of responsibility at the other. Balancing the budget is a little like protecting your virtue. You just have to learn to say no. We need to learn to say no to a ban and a yes to regulations and safety.
All right, that's enough. We can't.
Thank you.
That's an agendized item. Next speaker. Gino, how are you?
Good. I'll bet you I drove further to get here than you did.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to make a disclosure. Gino is our former probation officer for the county and a close friend, and he came from Arizona to speak. Go ahead, Gino.
A hell of a probation officer. Anyway, my message is just simply for everyone, all parents. The 20th to 25th is Red Ribbon Week. I'm here on behalf of narcotics officers, mostly. And we, for years, through probation in the sheriff's office, provided to the community presentations for Red Ribbon Week to our children. I don't know if many of you are familiar with the name of Kiki Camarena. He was a narcotics agent who was murdered, cut up by cartels. I was an agent working in this county narcotics for almost 10 years. And I see a lot of change that's occurred, in the county, and we forget about the kids. And my message from Mesa was basically, I know you've got the huge agenda here going on. I want to put another agenda. Rick, listen. go to the kids. Red Ribbon Week is drug prevention. Put it in their hearts. Regardless of how it is, regulation, whatever the heck they're doing, put it in their hearts that our unity, our lives are important. Child endangerment is important. You're all adults and you can do whatever you want in your households. Our children don't have a word, and they don't have a say. Protect our kids. And that was my message from Mesa.
Thank you.
See ya.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our 30-minute period for public comment. Can I see by a show of hands any further people that wish to speak during the general public comment? Sir, that'll be continued after our regular agenda. Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda. Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, has everybody reviewed the consent agenda items? If so, is there anybody from the public that wishes to pull any item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there any staff member or board of supervisors desiring to pull an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. So moved. Moved by Supervisor Clapp.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Tofinelli. Any public comment on that? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board to the vote. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed indicate by saying no. Hearing none, motion carries 5-0, unanimous. Madam Clerk.
Item number 4 is from the Planning Department to conduct a public hearing to adopt an ordinance rescinding Chapter 17.95 and replacing it with a new Chapter 17.95 banning or regulating cannabis cultivation and related commercial activities to certify the environmental impact report.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we start on this particular agendized item, I want to remind you how the procedure will work. The first presentation will be by staff. There will be no time limit for staff's presentations. Then there will be inquiries by the Board of Supervisors of staff. At that time, when that concludes, we'll open it up to public comment on the specific agendized item. You will have 3 minutes to comment, and I would like to remind everybody, you'll get a lot more words said if you're not repeating the same issues by the previous speaker. So if you may want to kind of talk it over a little bit if you have multiple people, and cover all topics within your time limits. We're going to go ahead and start the public comment, but we are going to be taking a break at 10 o'clock. I'm sorry, not public comment. We'll start agenda item, but we will be taking a break at 10 o'clock for staff, just so everybody's aware. Madam Clerk, first item, we ready to go?
She already read it, so.
I'm sorry, what?
She's already read the item.
Okay.
So, I'll go.
Mr. Maurer, you're up.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Peter Maurer, Planning Director. With me today are Gary Jacobs from Ascent Environmental, the primary consultant on the EIR, Julie Moss-Lewis, Deputy County Counsel, Tiffany Wright, outside counsel from Remy Moose Manley, and Chris Muntank, also from Ascent. This item is a recommendation by the Planning Commission to amend Title 17 to replace Chapter 1795, which is the urgency ordinance regulating commercial cannabis cultivation, with a new Chapter 1795, either banning all cultivation and commercial activities or strictly regulating them. These are equally weighted alternatives that the majority of the Commission forwarded to you. The ban would not apply to the minimum personal cultivation permitted under state law or to dispensaries, which are regulated under a separate ordinance that is the following item on your agenda. A little bit of background: in December 2015, the then sitting Board of Supervisors directed staff to prepare a regulatory ordinance that would allow and set standards for cultivation of cannabis, both indoor and outdoor, as well as related commercial uses such as manufacturing, testing, and distribution. At that time, the board stated that they did not want to revise the dispensary ordinance. Staff returned to the board in February 2016 with draft regulations, and which the board, after some modification, established as the provisions they would like to see in the ordinance. Staff determined and the board agreed that an EIR would be the appropriate CEQA document to prepare, and the county undertook this process in early 2016 by releasing the notice of preparation on April 5th, 2016. We also hired Ascend Environmental to prepare the EIR, and that contract was finalized in June last year. During that time, an influx of cannabis cultivators arrived to the county. Because of this new cultivation activity, concerns were raised by the public and staff that we needed to have some regulation in place in the interim while we were preparing the EIR and the final ordinance. So the urgency ordinance was adopted on May 10th, 2016. We had over 740 registration applications that completely overwhelmed county staff, including planning department, sheriff, code enforcement, as well as other departments. The county is still processing these applications, and so far we've issued 188 applications. We've denied 186. 45 have been withdrawn, and there are still about 320 that are in process. We've also processed 98 appeals of those denied applications. In January, with the ascension of the new board, new direction was given to staff to ban cultivation and other activities. After discussion with the board, it was agreed that the county should continue with the preparation of the EIR and use that in whatever action is taken regarding the ordinance. The ban was an alternative in the EIR, and it's certainly appropriate to use to select an alternative identified in EIR as the final ordinance. It's important to understand what the purpose of an EIR is, what it does and what it does not do. An EIR is an informational document. It is intended to provide the public and the decision makers with information about the environmental effects of a project or action that the county may approve or undertake. It does not dictate the outcome of the decision, but identifies impacts, potential mitigation measures, and alternatives that could reduce the environmental effects of a project. It is not an economic analysis, although economics may be used to make findings of overriding considerations should the county choose an alternative that has a greater environmental effect than the most environmentally sensitive one, or if it finds that mitigation measures are infeasible. CEQA is a procedural law. Steps must be taken and notice provided as prescribed by the law. The draft EIR was issued on May 1st, 2017, and circulated for a period of 45 days, as required under CEQA. The county received numerous comments, all of which had to be responded to in the final EIR. That document was released September 8th. The draft EIR identified 3 alternatives to the proposed ordinance. No project, which is required by law, which compared the project with doing nothing and continue to operate under the urgency ordinance until it expires in February. A ban alternative, and a reduced zoning alternative, which eliminated the rural residential zone for commercial cultivation. The analysis in the EIR found that both the ban and the reduced zoning would have fewer environmental effects than the proposed ordinance. In response to comments on the draft EIR, a 4th alternative was added that could also further reduce impacts. This was to increase the minimum parcel size for cultivation. The ban was identified as the alternative with the least amount of environmental impacts because it would prohibit any cultivation activity that could result in such impacts. The areas found to be impacted by the other alternatives but could be mitigated are impacts to biological resources, to cultural resources, water quality, and air quality, specifically greenhouse gases. There were 2 areas that were found to be significant and unavoidable where mitigation measures would not reduce it to a level of less than significance, and that was traffic and air quality relating to odors. There were many comments that disagreed with the findings of the EIR, which is not uncommon with controversial projects such as this. One area of controversy is the fact that the EIR does not address what might happen should a ban go unenforced. As stated earlier, the EIR does not typically analyze economic impacts of an action. It is an environmental impact report. However, this EIR did reference the fact that funding would be eliminated from the ban, both from the lack of fee revenue from subsequent applications or renewals, and because the Measure C tax would not be collected. But an EIR is supposed to analyze the impacts of the project, not what could happen if a developer, or in this case, cannabis growers, fail to comply with the conditions of approval or the provisions of an ordinance. To try to analyze such impacts would be pure speculation. The EIR prepared by the consultant has been reviewed by county council, the planning staff, and outside counsel hired to assist the county with this project. We have found that the EIR meets the requirements of CEQA, provides a range of alternatives, and adequately analyzes the identified impacts of the proposed ordinance and the alternatives. The draft ordinance recommended by the Commission is a comprehensive ban on cultivation of both medical and recreational cannabis, as well as manufacturing, testing, and distribution. It does provide for the minimum cultivation allowed by state law, which is 6 plants grown indoors. The recommendation also, the ban ordinance also contains provisions for rehabilitation of existing cultivation sites. So it requires that any cannabis cultivation site that has been abandoned be cleaned up so that it is in a hazard-free and reusable condition. It does not require that it be returned to its original state. Where grading occurred, it's just not possible to try to, regrade a site to go back to the original contours. But it does, similar to what we have with mining operations, a requirement that it be reclaimed, that the soil be stabilized, that any kind of junk or garbage be cleaned up, structures removed, those kinds of things. So the Commission's recommendation is that we return to a usable and hazard-free condition. The other alternative of the Commission, which has not been fully developed into an ordinance, as the ban ordinance has been, is a regulatory ordinance that strictly limits where cultivation could occur. And attachment B in your staff report has the full, complete list of the bullets. I just want to sort of highlight the principal points of what the Commission has recommended. Should the board choose this, and this was the recommendation of the Planning Commission, that they felt that either a strict regulatory ordinance or a ban would be acceptable to the Commission, as long as it was a strict regulatory ordinance. So the provisions of the recommended version from the Planning Commission was that outdoor or mixed-light cultivation would be permitted only in the A1, the General Agriculture, the Ag Preserve AP zone, and the General Forest GF zone. Indoor cultivation would be allowed in those zones as well as the industrial zones, M1, M2, and M4. A 5-acre minimum parcel size would be allowed for cultivation unless it is adjacent to a residential property, and then it would be a 20-acre minimum parcel size. There would be a 200-foot setback compared with the 75-foot setback that is currently under the urgency ordinance, 200-foot setback for all outdoor cultivation. Indoor cultivation on industrial zones would be what the standard setback is for that zone district. Unless it's adjacent to residential, then the 200-foot setback would also apply. Only growers who successfully registered under the current urgency ordinance program would be allowed to get new permits or licenses under this new regulatory program. And those who were successfully registered on lands zoned other than A1, AP, or GF, or in the industrial zones, would have the opportunity to relocate their grow to an appropriately zoned piece of property or apply for a zone change should it be appropriate to do so. Successful registrants would have a 2-year window They would have to stop cultivation immediately, but they would have a 2-year window in which to find a new location, clean up their old site, and apply for their permits to move their cultivation site to this new appropriately zoned location. They must also fully remediate their existing site. The ordinance would also sunset after 5 years and revert to a total ban for cultivation. They also recommended that some stricter standards be applied, including that all cultivation be certified organic or whatever similar program the state develops for cannabis, that any indoor cultivation be have filtration, carbon or charcoal filtration systems that remove any of the odors from the air that comes out of the buildings. That any hoop houses have covers at night so that we don't have the glowworms across the hillside and the light pollution that's been caused by some of the mixed light cultivation. And that if wells are affected, that there's a decrease in well production by 10%, that they would have to reduce their water usage by 50% until they could remediate the program with wells. So those are the recommendations of the Planning Commission. If you have any questions of me, of the consultants, or council, we'd be happy to entertain them at this point in time. We recommend, however, that we do not get into the details of the ordinance until after the public has had an opportunity to comment, and then we can start discussing sort of the nitty-gritty of the language of the code itself. So with that concludes my presentation. It's just after 10 o'clock, so maybe we'll take a break and then come back for questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taking a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back.
Would you mind closing the back door, please? Oh. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I see we have a few empty chairs. I hope everybody's in the lobby. In all fairness, I'm going to ask somebody to go out and get them. We need to have everybody in here. This is a stakeholder. Okay, we'll begin. We'll come back now after staff presentation by Mr. Maurer. We'll bring it back to the board for questions of staff. Board have any questions of Mr. Maurer regarding his presentation? Supervisor Garamendi.
Thank you very much. And Peter, thank you very much for all the work that you've done on this for the last 18 or so months. And it was a pleasure to watch the Planning Commission meeting. I think that's a very good board, and we should be proud of them. They work well together. I think you guys did a nice job bringing this to us. I don't feel qualified to really judge whether an EIR is adequate or not, but I'm assured by you and staff that we have an adequate EIR. But I did have A couple questions that, you know, I don't think that will change the adequacy, but I felt like I needed to sort of figure out a little bit. The first one is, obviously, that the EIR assumes there's full compliance with the ban. In the first option, it says very clearly, and one of the statements in the EIR was the board finds, or one of the findings was, finds that there's no feasible mitigation resources available that would reduce potential environmental impacts caused by illegal cannabis activities if such activities were to occur in spite of a ban. How do we, in EIR talk, as people go through CEQA documents, are you required just to assume that, hey, if we say no, everybody's just going to jump to attention and do what we say? And why do we do that?
Well, I think that the EIR recognizes that there will be some noncompliance. But as far as the analysis that we have to do, we assume that we're looking at what the ordinance says, not what people might do in noncompliance of the ordinance. What is the effect of adopting the ordinance? We will have to find a way to enforce whatever rules are put in place, whether it's a regulatory ordinance or a ban. And the analysis that is done is, the assumption of compliance is sort of written into the law, that you don't analyze what would happen if someone didn't abide by the mitigation measures. The whole point is saying these are the things we could do to reduce the impacts. But if we're approving a subdivision map and there are wetlands that are supposed to be avoided, that's the whole point of identifying what the impact could be and how do you avoid that. If the developer goes ahead and bulldozes through the wetland, that is just purely a violation of the project approval, a violation of the mitigation measure, and there would be sanctions imposed on that case. In an ordinance, you look at what are the provisions of the ordinance. And so, comparing the various provisions of different alternatives of an ordinance, including the ban, we've come to the conclusion that not having any cultivation in the county would have less impact than if some cultivation were to occur. Perhaps I could defer a little bit to either Tiffany or to Gary, a little bit more about the legal ramifications or the specifics of CEQA law on that.
So but basically we're required to assume that we're in a perfect world as we do this stuff.
I don't know that we assume a perfect world, but I think we have to assume that the ordinance will be applied fairly and people will abide by the rules of that ordinance. We know that there's going to be some, just like any ordinance, we have over 1,000 code cases unrelated to cannabis that people violate the code all the time, and that's why we have a code enforcement program. So we know that not all rules are going to be followed. That's why we have law enforcement. But we have to assume in analyzing the impacts of an ordinance that is what is going to happen. Otherwise, we're purely speculating, and we don't know how many people are going to break the law. We don't know how many illegal cultivators might decide to either to continue to cultivate or to come here and start cultivating. It would be infeasible for us to speculate on that at that level.
One of the things when we refused to speculate is we didn't establish a baseline for the study. So, in section 2-11, it didn't recognize the existence of existing, perhaps illegal grows that were already here. And so we assume that we're starting from zero, and we're assuming that everybody will obey, and we'll get back to zero when we say that this is the least environmental impact.
Well, I think we do have a baseline, and that was part of the analysis that we looked at. And I'd like to have
Well,
maybe Gary respond to that
Okay,
question.
because in the final EIR, it says that speculation regarding the level of cannabis-related development within the county was deemed inappropriate and could potentially result in understated impacts.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Gary Jacobs with Ascent Environmental. To also put a capstone on what Peter was saying about the issue of speculation, one thing that CEQA requires is that if we get into a situation where there is speculation, that we state so, and then you terminate the discussion. So the issue of compliance under the ban, will people comply? We can't speculate on if people will or will not. We know that there will be a certain amount of noncompliance. There already is noncompliance. But the degree to which that would occur is something that we just can't speculate on. And what we've tried to do in the final EIR is have that dialogue about what one could possibly expect, but we're basing our conclusions on compliance with the ban. So that's what the conclusions are based on. As the baseline issue is very complicated on this project. Typically, when we work on a project, the baseline is straightforward. We're looking at a subdivision or something like that. We can go out there, we can look at it, we can see that the area is pristine or partially graded or whatever, base our existing conditions on that, what we see out in the field, and base the impacts on top of that. Because of the programmatic nature, county-wide nature of the ordinance, we had to take a broader view of what we considered the baseline, and also because the urgency ordinance was being enacted at the time we had already started the EIR, there was a lot of activity going on. So what we assumed in the EIR is that any activities, whether they were ongoing, whether they were existing, or whether they were going to be new activities, could result in the environmental impacts that the EIR articulated, and that the mitigation measures that are in the EIR that would become part of the ordinance would have to be applied on all properties. So even if a property was existing and under the urgency ordinance had received all of its approvals, the EIR would assume that, let's say for instance on groundwater effects, that those conditions that would be part of a new ordinance through mitigation measures would be adopted, and that even though it was an existing operation, if it was having effects on its neighbor's groundwater, that the mitigation measures in the EIR that would become part of the ordinance would be folded in. They wouldn't be exempted just because they happen to be existing under an urgency ordinance, or perhaps it was an illegal operation that was now coming into compliance.
I have more questions, but thank you.
Further questions by the board of staff? Is there any other staff member to present? Sheriff?
Good morning. Sheriff DiBasilio. I was asked by some board members to give some statistics in regards to the emergency ordinance. Right now, I'll give you some stats from this year, and then from when the urgency ordinance was brought into play back in May of 2016 to current. Right now, between January 1st of 2017 to October 12th, which was, I believe, last Thursday or Friday, the Sheriff's Department has spent about $520,000 in salaries just for enforcements and doing eradications. To finish the season out, we're estimating it's going to be about another $150,000. Again, that is just in salaries alone. That doesn't cost out any other equipment. It doesn't cost out the contractor that we've utilized, who we've already spent over $50,000 with. We'll be coming to the board next week to see about raising their monies so that we can continue to utilize that contractor for eradications. Doesn't account for co-compliance, doesn't account for what planning is doing. That's just what the sheriff's office has spent in salaries alone. And the way we set this program up, after discussions with county council and the auditor's office, we have the new marijuana funding program. We've got my guys, my marijuana team, split out. 80% goes to enforcement, 20% goes towards regulation, because most of what they're doing is on the enforcement side. Co-compliance is the one that's working on the regulation side, a little bit more doing the regulatory process. I've been very vocal through Facebook and in the newspaper on when we do eradications, where we're doing the eradications, to show the folks that the Sheriff's Department is doing everything that they possibly can to eradicate these illegal marijuana grows. Those are the ones that we are going after. And whether this is a registered grow that has is out of compliance, didn't pass registration or whatever, they fall into that illegal grow, so to speak. So these are what we've been going after. Realistically, I was asked how many people I would need, and just to try and get ahead or catch up, I guess, at least 5 to 6 more, you're looking at another $600,000 a year, just to give you guys a number. The other thing what we're running into is we've been working with HR on our injury and illness protection program that I'm sure you're all very aware of. My guys, we've run into some pesticides. That was a big issue. These guys are having to wear proper PPE, personal protective equipment, so that they're protected out on these sites now. Actually talked to Gino here a little bit about that, some issues that he's got going on from the years of dealing with methamphetamine labs and stuff. The things that we're dealing with are not things that we've dealt with in the past in marijuana grows. They seem to be enhanced now. So the guys are having to protect themselves more. It costs the county more money to do that because of the equipment that is needed to do that. The terrain that we work on is not flat like this room. It would be nice if it was. It would be very easy. But most of the time it's not. We're on very steep grades in brush. So there's a lot of things that are needed equipment-wise. We've utilized the road department, somebody else that has a lot of money invested into this program because of the time that they give us with their manpower and the equipment that we use from them. The ground being steep is unsafe. We've had a few twisted ankles. We've had no major injuries, which is a plus. It shows the diligence that the workers that have been out there, but there's still the opportunity and the possibilities of guys getting hurt. You're swinging machetes. We've come across some, and I won't even call them plants, I will call them trees, because the bases of some of these trees are about 4 to 5 inches around. They're absolutely huge, so we're having to utilize chainsaws. You start running with chainsaws. I logged for many years in this county back in the 70s and 80s, and you start carrying the chainsaw around in these hills and slip and fall, hands get cut, legs get cut with chainsaws. So again, more opportunity for injury and illness. And the reason for those quick little stories is that if this is going to continue, we're going to be looking at more costs for helicopters to come in so that they can airlift these things out. We've used CAMP, which was Campaign Against Marijuana Production. They still come out and help us. The National Guard has helped us, and a lot of this equipment gets airlifted out because of the terrain. And I don't know for a fact, but my opinion is that if we end up with a ban, which is again up to you folks, Clyde Clapp said it perfectly earlier today. He said, you guys make the laws, I enforce them. That's why it's called law enforcement. You make the laws, I enforce them. That's my job. If this stuff goes back to being a black market completely, I think we're going to see more grows in the hills, which is going to cause hogback up here behind us in San Andreas for years. Every year we go up there and we've had grows. This year we didn't have any grows because they've come down into the valley, if you want to call it that, to private property. That's going to force back up into the hills. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm stating facts. The facts are that the illegal growers are not going to go away. So something to think about. A lot of things that we're starting to see now is they're starting to register personal caregiver grows. We're just now getting into a time when the harvest season is starting to wind down. Our weather's changing. These folks are going to start going indoors. It's going to take more time for the sheriff's office to develop a case, and code compliance to develop a case that this caregiver grow is not just that, a caregiver grow. It is a commercial grow that they're doing inside of a building. It's going to happen in District 1. It's going to happen in District 5. It's going to happen everywhere. We're already seeing it. It takes more time. It's going to take the district attorney a lot more time to process these. So those cases aren't going to go away with a ban or with an ordinance. It's something that we need to think about. It's going to continue. I have talked about this before. I know Barbara Yook, the DA, has talked about this before. Again, whether there's a ban or whether there's a regulatory program, we need to have an investigative team. The district attorney needs to have, and I am advocating for the DA right now, she needs an investigative team. They need another DDA that does nothing but marijuana cases. They need a DA investigator. They need the support staff, and we need a forensic accountant that works between the sheriff's office and the DA to go after these growers that are illegal. If they're all illegal because of a ban, that's fine. We still need that unit because it's going to protect the county in the long run, because they'll be able to go after asset forfeitures. There's a lot of things that person's going to be able to do. Again, more money. Some statistics for you. This year, as of Friday the 13th, January 1st to Friday the 13th of this month, we have seized 11,225 pounds of processed marijuana. We've eradicated 52,589 plants. We have recovered 6.97 pounds of concentrated cannabis. We've recovered 24 guns. We've seized $118,964. We've had 50 arrests, and that's at a total of 53 locations. That's just from January to last Friday. Since this program started in May of 2016, we've destroyed 128,535 plants. We have destroyed 21,803.9 pounds of processed marijuana. We have confiscated 12.87 pounds of concentrated cannabis. We've had 8 BHO labs where they're making hash. We have had over 1,051 complaints filed at the sheriff's office. Again, those complaints, you got to remember the cycle. We've talked about this before. It comes into dispatch. They handle the call. It goes to deputy out on the street. The deputy on the street does his job. Then it gets sent over to the marijuana program, or it goes straight to the marijuana program. So it involves a lot of people. We do the arrests. We have arrests out on the street, goes into my jail, puts more people in the jail, needing more staff in jail. It's a big revolving cycle here. There have been, CAL FIRE has issued 38 conversion citations. Fish and Wildlife has issued 97 citations. We have had 33 outside agencies involved in doing these eradications, not including the sheriff's office. We've had a total in that time frame from May to current 134 arrests. So it's a busy process. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of money. And again, whether you ban it or whether you regulate it, the illegal activity is going to continue in this county. Don't think that because you ban it, it's going to stop. That's just unrealistic. Anytime there's an opportunity for somebody to make a quick buck, they're going to do that. We're already seeing that with some of the growers that are leaving their illegal grow sites and they're renting homes. I had a home rented next to me not a month ago, and it ended up being an indoor grow, and the property owner didn't know. But I advised them of that. That grow is no longer there. I told somebody this story real quick. It was pretty funny because I saw lights about 11:30 at night. I went out to yell at my dogs because they were barking. My dogs don't bark. So I go out, yell at my dogs, and I see 2 sets of headlights leave. So I told my wife, I said, I'm going to go check it in the morning, make sure the house wasn't burglarized or not vandalizing because I know it had been vacant. So I go over there, and I hear the humming of the fans, and I smell the marijuana, although my area has marijuana growing all over it right now, too. So I go over there, and I look inside the only window I can see and in the kitchen, and I see a sea of green. So I call the guy up. Now, remind you, this is at 8 o'clock in the morning. 10 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from his property management company saying what's going on. I tell them. At noon, my wife shoots me a text, hey, a black pickup just pulled up, and they're loading shit up, and they're running. So they left. Again, it's a funny story, but it's not so funny because the problem is that these people are renting homes. They're coming into our community, and they're renting homes, and they're going to convert the inside of these houses to growing marijuana. Now, whether they do it under a caregiver grow or whether they do it just to grow commercially inside of these houses, they're going to come in. Those are going to be harder for the sheriff's department and code compliance to deal with. It's going to take time and it's going to take money. So just keep that in the back of your minds.
Excuse me, folks. Sheriff's making a presentation. Go ahead.
I don't know, you guys are going to talk about this dispensaries later. I have some concerns about
That'll be the next
dispensaries.
agendized item, Sheriff.
I will wait on that then. Staffing, that was the other one. I was asked about my staffing. Right now, I have 8 empty deputy positions. That includes Tom Oldham that just retired. I had 7, now I'm up to 8. I have 3 gentlemen in the academy right now that will be graduating in November. And again, this doesn't go with whether it's a ban or regulation. I'm going with what you folks do. If you continue with my marijuana team, my marijuana enforcement team, I will have those 8 positions. I have 3 coming out of the academy. I'm looking at recruiting 2 more. That would give me 5 to put back into those positions. I would still have 3 vacant positions. If for some reason you dissolve my marijuana enforcement team, that means that the 5 gentlemen that are in that program right now, I have the lieutenant that you folks just gave me to oversee the marijuana program and the investigations. You'll have to decide what you want to do with that lieutenant. If you want to leave him in investigations, that would be fantastic. If not, we'll have to figure out what we're going to do with him. I have a sergeant in the marijuana team. Again, he's there to help supervise his men right on the streets. If the Met team goes away, you have to decide what you want to do with him. And then I have 3 deputies that will go back to the streets. So if you take the lieutenant and the sergeant out, that puts 3 people back in. That leaves me 5 positions. And if I have the 3 coming out of the academy and I pick up the other true recruits, that means I'm full. That means that you're going to have to either give me more positions or the sheriff's office doesn't have any more. Even at that point, I'm still going to be about 7 positions under where we were staffing-wise in 2003. Okay? The marijuana calls are going to continue to come in, and we are going to continue to deal with them because that's our job as law enforcement. We will go out and handle the calls. What you're going to see, and I want the citizens to understand this, is that if I do not have a marijuana team, and I hate to put the pressure on you guys this way, but if I don't have a marijuana team out there doing what they're doing, and again, you see what the stats that we've been doing and people are hearing what we're doing, if that team is not there, the process is going to continue, but it's going to be drastically reduced because these guys are going to be on patrol now. They're not going to be a specialized team. It takes, And Mike, you know, it takes time to get a search warrant put together, because if there's a ban in effect, then it's a flat-out criminal issue. That means they have to do the investigative process, they have to do all their groundwork, they have to put a search warrant together. Search warrant has to go to the DA, get approved by the DA, then has to go to a judge for the judge to sign it. Takes about 2 weeks. That's on the short side, depending on what's going on. If you do a regulation, that still doesn't change. That process doesn't change. We're still going to have the illegal growers. So again, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just telling you the timeline is the same no matter what you do for the sheriff's office. Again, law enforcement, that's what we do. Along with the deputies, I have 2 full-time staff working with the marijuana team. They do the statistics, they do callbacks, they do an array of things for the deputies so that it saves them time and lets them get out in the streets more. Those are 2 full-time staffers that would be laid off. If for some reason I could convince you that if you made my marijuana team go away, I have positions for them in the department in other areas that I can absolutely utilize them in. We have 4 part-timers that would also be laid off. That's my staffing. And that's where we're at right now. Any questions?
Questions of the sheriff by the board? Supervisor Garamendi.
Sheriff, thank you very much for the work that your Met team's been doing. It's had an impact, and I appreciate the fact that you've been very public about what you guys are doing. I think that helps a great deal. So by my math, you're able to take those 9 Met team positions, assuming if this board decides to go with the ban, and you lose those Met team funding, you could put them back in your department. So we're not, most of them back in your department, minus the 4 specialists, and we have to figure out what to do with the lieutenant and the sergeant. But you will have less cops, bottom line.
Realistically, yes. Yeah, in the overall picture, yes, because the positions that are vacant right now will be filled by the Met team, so I will not be able to hire those other people to bring them in.
Right, so you have a net loss of manpower.
Yes.
In your experience, how is it, have you been seeing, I mean, there's clearly a lot of crime, and thank you for knocking it down, but regulated, compliant versus illegal growers, what would you say the breakdown is between the 2 in crime statistics?
I actually have a presentation that Captain Macedo and some of the Met team people put together, and the statistics, just from what I remember, the illegal growers actually are obviously a lot higher in calls for service or complaints that we're getting and the amount of cases that we're putting on them. The registered growers are down on the totem pole. We're not having the amount of complaints. A lot of more of the complaints that we get on the registered growers is that, are they a registered grower? We go out and we check, and they're either incompliant or they're not, and we deal with them at that point. But we're not having the problems with the registered growers as we are the, obviously, illegal growers.
Sheriff, you know my district very well.
I do.
I appreciate that. What is my community safer or less safe under a ban?
I don't know that that's a question I can really answer. I know that we've had there are so many illegal growers in your district. And again, I don't know that with a ban or with regulation whether that's going to change. I think that if you ban it, I still think your illegal growers are going to be there. I truly believe that you're going to probably see more influx of illegal growers coming into the county. With a ban or with regulations, and I got to say, a lot of the registered growers have been eyes and ears for us. They do give us information saying, hey, this guy's doing this. They're an illegal grower, so they are helping us in that aspect. It's just like having citizens in the community that call us and say, hey, this house is over here, it's vacant, there's not supposed to be anybody there. They call us and let us know so we can go over there and do the investigation and find out, okay, is somebody breaking into the house, or are there people moving into the house? There are only so many of us. Obviously, I could tell you that by our stats. We rely on the public to give us that extra information to let us know. The young lady that was having her conversation with Mr. Clapp, she should have called the sheriff's office. If she hasn't, I would like her to talk to me and find out what's going on. If the crime rate has gone up in Rancho Calaveras, I'd certainly like to know. My statistics don't show that, but we need the public. So back to answering your question, the public is going to give us that information. If people are doing things illegally, the registered growers are helping us. If there's no registered growers up there, then it's all on us and the public. I don't know what the answer is. Honestly, is it going to get worse or better for your districts? I think somebody talked about that earlier. I can't predict what's going to happen.
But we do know that we're going to have illegal grows going on, and you will have less manpower to enforce the law.
That is a fact.
That is a fact. So I will assume that that would make my community less safe if there's less deputies. And I know I was speaking to some folks who are dealing in real estate, and inquiries were actually going up as to land purchases because of a potential ban, because they can do the math as well, and they know there'll be less deputies patrolling District 2 and knocking these guys out.
Well, I will tell you that in the plan that I've submitted to Mr. Lutz, like I said, I'm a businessman. I did a 5-year plan, and my plan is to bring my staffing level back up to where I can have more deputies out on the street, which means I have more coverage, so the calls for service times go down. It enhances everything. If the marijuana team goes away, one way or the other, if the marijuana team goes away, that's going to take longer to get back up to the numbers that I want. And it's going to mean I have to come back to the board, and I'm going to come back to you anyhow, whether the marijuana team stays in place or not. I need more people down the road. That's the whole program, is to get more people out on the streets to protect the citizens that are sitting behind me. Both sides of the coin. My job is to protect everybody. I cannot play favorites to one side or the other. My job is to protect human life and property. That's what I'm going to do.
You guys, your team is making a great effort at chipping away at this big rock of the illegal grows. Fully funded, I think we'll all agree we're never going to get to 100% of getting rid of all the bad guys. If there was, we'd all sing Kumbaya and it'd be great. But that's not reality, and we're dealing with reality. If you were funded and we continued this MET team and we gave you more funding, timeline, how long to get it under control?
Well, I've said it before, with the right amount of people, give me 3 to 4 years and we'll have a good handle on it. Again, I have to be realistic that you will never get a handle on getting rid of everybody. I mean, holy cow, we've had legalized alcohol for how many years and they're still bootleggers.
Sure.
So it's not going to go away. If there's a dollar to be made, people that are going to do things illegally are going to go after it. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I mean, it's legal to buy cars and people still have chop shops. It doesn't matter. The illegal element is there. They're going to make a quick buck. But 3 to 4 years, and I think that we'll have a really good handle on it. I think that this community would feel very safe.
Thank you.
But it takes people.
That's my primary goal, is to have a safe community up country, and without your deputies, it's not going to be safe.
Well, the other thing I know, and I don't know, I haven't talked to Rebecca Callan about the funding that's left from the Measure C funds, how much money is left. I know that there was a little over $7 million brought in. I know we used a lot of it to balance the budget. If for some reason the board chooses a ban, I would like to see at least $3 to $4 million of that set aside so that we can keep the marijuana team in play.
All right, well, I think most of that's already accounted for in our budget. I'm sure we'll get to budget discussions later.
And I could be talking out of turn. I don't remember how much of that was left spent.
Yeah, we've encumbered all those dollars.
Have we? Okay. Well, find a tree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Any other board member questions of the sheriff? I have a couple of questions, Sheriff. You mentioned in your presentation that you have outside agencies assisting you. In fact, I think the number was 33. Is that what you stated?
Yeah.
Is there any cost associated with the county for those outside agencies?
No.
Then how did we get them?
Beg, plead, and borrow. ask for help. The environmental crimes that were involved brought in DWR, brought in Fish and Wildlife, CAL FIRE, so they've assisted. The problem is, as we well know, throughout the state, they're having the same issue in a lot of other areas, a lot of other counties, so they can't be specific to stay with us. The National Guard came in and helped us. We've had help from a lot of agencies that I'm aware of. We haven't been charged for anything other than the contractor that we've hired to help do the eradications for actually hauling this stuff away for us, because we have trailers to haul it on the smaller grows, but when we get these larger grows, we have to have outside help.
You did cover the issue of if we go to a ban situation, it's going to reduce our ability to respond to calls for service as a whole throughout the county?
No, the ban doesn't have anything to do with calls for service. That's not going to change. What I was getting at is that I'm trying to get my staffing built up so we can reduce those calls for service. And realistically, the calls for service with a ban might go up a little bit, or the timelines might go down a little bit, I guess I should say, because we'll have those other deputies back on the streets. But the problem is the call volume for the illegal grows is going to go up, because now everybody's going to have illegal grows next to them. If I know that his is a legal grow now it becomes illegal, he continues to grow, now my deputies have to respond there. Yeah. So there's going to be more calls for service. So in essence, there is going to be an impact. And again, we go back to that vicious cycle. Now I have more calls going into dispatch because every grow in the county is an illegal grow. So those calls are going to go up. Our arrests are going to go up. That means they're going to have more people in jail, which means I'm going to need more correctional officers. Again, it's that big vicious cycle.
And I have to, I don't want to appear like I'm giving you a baited question here, but I'm going to give you a baited question.
Swell.
And I can only do that by personal experience. There was a time, long, long ago, in a land far, far away, I wore a badge and a gun in the county of Calaveras County. And I worked the street as a patrol deputy. When calls for service increase and manpower is reduced, or available manpower, person power, I stand corrected, which beat gets stripped of that beat officer to handle the calls for other associated crimes in the remaining districts?
Well, our county...
Or does that actually occur?
Oh, absolutely. Our county is split up into quarters, the way we have it at the sheriff's office. So you're gonna go to the busiest area. Valley Springs is one of the busiest areas that we have in the county. So that's going to strip Mr. Garamendi of some personnel up there, because if we have more calls down there, they're going to be down in the Valley Springs because there's more population, there's more people, there's more things going on. You go to the other side of the county, Arnold is typically a little bit busier than Copper, but not always. It's just, that's kind of flip-flops back and forth depending on the seasons. But the bottom line is, if we're short in man power, women power, as we have women deputies, people power, as you put it, there's going to be a staff shortage. Calls for service are going to take longer to get to because we don't have the manpower.
And those calls for service are categorized in a manner that you respond to the most serious, dangerous crimes first, correct?
It's like going to the hospital. The worse you are, the more attention you get.
You mentioned some other agency involvement. I noticed that you mentioned the forensic analysis or forensic investigator. Can you tell me the need for that?
Well, again, to chase that money trail, these marijuana growers are dealing with cash. We know they can't use banks at this point. State's working on changing that too, I guess. But to be able to prove that that money has come from an illicit source in order to do an asset forfeiture on their property, their cars, boats, whatever, it takes time, and it takes somebody who is very knowledgeable in that field. That's a specialized field. It's like being a homicide investigator. It takes time, and it takes somebody who has that expertise. And again, that's something that Barbara Yook and I have talked about, having that housed in the DA's office. But it benefits the county because now you're able to do those asset forfeitures. I've had numerous people ask me, well, why aren't you doing asset forfeitures? Well, it's time consuming as heck. We don't have the manpower to do it, and it's a specialized thing. It takes a lot of work, and that person would be dedicated to doing just that.
Just for the information and education of the public, how much money does the agency involved in the actual arrest or investigation receive off an asset forfeiture project or crime?
I don't actually know the answer to that.
Word has been disseminated that it's about 25% of the total asset.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Is that number familiar?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Is that a source of revenue for the county? Or
Oh,
for the
absolutely.
sheriff?
Well, I know that some of it would go to the DA, some would go to the sheriff's office. I don't know how much the county gets out of that.
Now, the million-dollar question. You provided data on crime statistics. Do you know what that data is based on? Non-reported crimes? or reported crimes?
These weren't crime statistics. These were marijuana statistics that I quoted today. And those are hard numbers that I've got from my marijuana team.
Okay,
These
so
are
you don't have any data on the reported crimes uninvestigated so far?
I didn't bring those. I do have them. I actually had them for another presentation that had not been done, but I do have those statistics. I don't have them right now.
Would you agree that there is a situation in this county where you have circumstances or incidents that are non-reported crimes?
Oh, absolutely. I hear people telling me all the time, hey, this happened, did you hear about it? And it's like, no, I have no idea because it was never reported to the sheriff's office. I know our crime statistics have gone up. Obviously, our homicides, everybody's talked about that. The homicides have gone up, burglaries have gone up, armed robberies have gone up, thefts have gone up. I do have those statistics. Actually, in 2015, they were here. In 2016, they were here. And actually, in 2017, they have come back down a little bit. That part I can tell you. I can't tell you the exact numbers, but I know that they have gone up and they have come back down as of current 2017 times.
Is there any, to your crime analysis through your department, is there any indication to see if those crimes are marijuana related or are those crimes in general?
Those are crimes in general. I do have them broken out between marijuana related and not. The problem is it's kind of skewed because if we catch a kid or somebody who steals a candy bar out of Marvell store and they happen to have marijuana on them, then marijuana gets put into that. So it's marijuana related because they had marijuana on them. Doesn't mean it was a cause of the crime, but just means it's marijuana. So it's hard to track that specific, I guess. If marijuana is related, then marijuana is related. But I do have those statistics.
Thank you, Sheriff. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mills.
Supervisor Garamendi? Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Mills.
Yes, Sheriff, I think funding the med team needs to be a separate discussion from what we're talking about today. You will be available for questions later?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm here for the whole show.
Supervisor Garamendi.
Yeah, I actually don't think that funding the MET team is a separate discussion. I think it's very germane to a ban or not a ban. It has been suggested that the way that we could fund a MET team in law enforcement is by finding efficiencies in county government. Are there any efficiencies in the sheriff's office that are going to allow us to hire more people? How can we squeeze you? And since that has been proposed as an option, Sheriff.
I think we've been squeezed pretty tight already. I know that when we started the budget process this year, Mr. Lutz and I talked about some unfunded positions, and I was very willing to give that money back, if you want to call it that. I mean, it's not my money, it's the county's money. But we pulled that out of our budget so that we could make ends meet in other areas. And I don't have a problem with that as long as I get that money back when I have my people in place. These 7 positions, 8 positions that I have right now, those are unfunded. They're funded positions, but they're unfilled. So if the board needs them to support somebody else, that's fine and dandy. But once those positions are filled, I need to know that that money's there so that I can protect the citizens of the community. I don't know that you're going to squeeze any more juice out of the orange, so to speak. You can talk to Captain Macedo. He was, doing budgets for many years now with the Sheriff's Department, and they squeezed every bit that they can, everywhere they can. They cut all line items. We've cut as much as we can. We're just now starting to get back online to where we can actually start doing things again, and not feel so much of a crunch. You could talk for days about, we're still talking about people that are leaving. I've got 3 correctional officers that look like they're going to leave because of more pay that they go to CDC for. So that's another issue that, I don't know if you want to talk about that now or not. It's just, money is the root of all evil. Always has been, always will be, unfortunately.
And you've got deputies that are underpaid already. I was looking at Stockton's hiring, 50 new police officers and paying considerably more than our deputies. Your vehicles, I've ridden along in vehicles that are close to 200,000 miles on them.
Yeah, they're getting up there. Stanislaus County just opened up a new jail, and he's working on, Adam Christensen, the sheriff down there, is working on hiring another 245 guys. And finding qualified applicants is not an easy task. We're going to the academy, and I think I mentioned this last year at budget time. We had a recruit in the academy who was working for us and went to Lodi in the middle of the academy. Typically, Mike knows if you go through an academy and you're getting sponsored by somebody, you stay there. Well, Lodi says, hey, we're going to give you more money plus a bonus for coming over to us, and so he jumped ship.
Wow. Sorry about that.
And that's not only the academy that's occurring in. That's occurring in your correctional officers' academies.
Yeah.
It's correct. It's actually happening all over law enforcement.
It is. Rural counties have typically been lower paid. They go from here, they go down to the valley, and they go from the valley to Hayward, Bay Area. The people are chasing the mighty dollar. They have a 30-year, and I don't blame them. They have a 30-year career or so that they need to survive and make money for their family, so they're going to go where the money is. We have the benefit of a great community to live in. We really do. I've been up here pretty much my whole adult life, and I'm still here for a reason, because I like it. But the younger generation is chasing the money more than the lifestyle, I think.
Thank you, Sheriff. Appreciate your comments.
I'll be back.
Is there any other staff member that wish to present? Ms. Callen, I want to thank you for responding. I made that request.
Thank you. Rebecca Callen, Auditor Controller. There was some conversation earlier while I was listening regarding how much Measure C funding there is left. And the reality is Measure C is not a segregated fund. It comes into the general fund. It came into the general fund, into the non-departmental budget unit last fiscal year. It's doing the same this fiscal year. So when last fiscal year we received over $5 million in Measure C tax money, that money was used to close the budget. It was used to allow us to not transfer teeter funds in to balance the budget. It was used to fill that gap for the stopgap with regards to revenue. And it was why we were able to close the year with a little over $3 million in cash carry. When the budget was built, the administrative office obviously uses that $3 million, and they use whatever revenues are going to be budgeted in this fiscal year in order to build the budget, and that's what the Board of Supervisors passed earlier in the fall. There was a little over $2 million of Measure C funds that were budgeted in the 17-18 fiscal year, and every dollar, every penny of that is budgeted. There's not some sort of pot of Measure C money sitting off to the side awaiting to be allocated by the board. You allocated all of it when you passed the budget for 17-18 final. The only money that is sitting aside in a separate fund is the regulatory money. and that also was included in the budget. I think it was a little over $2.7 million was included in the 17-18 budget, and that also was allocated and approved by the Board of Supervisors for expenditures related to the current urgency ordinance that is in effect as of this moment. Until the 14th of February. The included in that budget was staff for the Sheriff's Department, staff for code compliance, ag department, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that has been allocated. So there is no other money associated with cannabis that's sitting off to a side awaiting allocation. It has all been allocated with expenditures. Any questions?
Supervisor Garamendi, questions, Ms.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for coming up. And this is kind of a question for you, both you and CAO Lutz. But you mentioned, we've allocated all the Measure C money. I know we used it last year to balance out our books in June. What is the current structural hole in the county budget?
Well, it doesn't seem like it's really been changing. I can't recall off the top of my head what had been budgeted last fiscal year for stopgap for teeter, but I want to say it was, do you recall, Tim? Was it close to 3? I can't remember if last year was 1.8 or if it was.
In terms of how much teeter was budgeted?
How much teeter was budgeted for last fiscal year?
Yeah, I think it was about 3.1 million that was budgeted last year.
Yeah, so things have not changed substantially between last year and this year. Unfortunately, our expenditures are going up, staffing being one of our largest expenditures, so PERS costs are going up. So we were happy to see that 8% increase in assessed values from the assessor, which then correlates into an increase for our property tax revenue for the entire county, and every taxing jurisdiction was thrilled to see that. Unfortunately, all of our costs also increased, probably to the tune of about the same amount.
So we used roughly $3+ million of teeter funds to last year's budget.
We did not have to. We used Measure C instead.
Right, so we didn't have to use the one-time funds.
Yes.
What is the total structural deficit?
Based on crunch numbers and an estimate, and this is outside of the cannabis program, so when I'm looking at the urgency ordinance program, when I'm looking at the enforcement program, I'm looking at it as a separate matter since it's right now at this point tied either directly or indirectly to the urgency ordinance, would be $5.142 million for a structural deficit.
And so we add in, and when you throw in cannabis enforcement?
The estimate then, 7.29.
So 7.29 is what we'd require to stay status quo. That's our deficit of where we are today.
Essentially, yes, operating as we are today in the absence of the Measure C funds.
What will we do without the Measure C funds?
Well, at that point, it would be a policy decision as to where budgetary reductions would need to occur. Obviously, and I know the county's familiar with going through the exercise with looking at departmental budget lines to trim any contracts or non-essential types of activities or services. The next step beyond that would have to be a staffing reduction.
So we would, if we didn't have Measure C funds, we would eliminate the MET team and all the enforcement activities around that, which would reduce us to about that 5.14, which would be cutting past the bone at that point. We'd be getting into bodies.
Yes, we would be cutting staff positions. Assuming, again, you couldn't find the $5 million elsewhere within the general funded department budgets.
Mm-hmm. And the 5.1, those are all general fund discretionary dollars, mostly, correct? Would be where we'd have to make it up out of discretionary general fund dollars?
This is specifically to the general funded departments, yes.
And who is the largest funded, what is our greatest expense in the general fund?
The sheriff.
The sheriff. So they would be cut to balance
Sheriff
things out.
and jail, which again, under the sheriff's department, those are the largest general funded departments.
So Sheriff, it's not just your Met team.
And we, Sheriff DeBasilio and I had a discussion about that because I go, what do we do? The reality is there is a huge amount of discretionary money that was included in this 17-18 fiscal year that if, and I'm not saying go one way or the other, I'm just saying you have to come up with money from somewhere. So, and I think what's important to understand is just the history of the county. I don't feel like this county ever recovered from the recession. We really didn't. And when we started to feel recovery happening, Butte Fire came. And so any recovery that we had thought was happening went up in flames, if you were. So the problem is we all have cut. Every single one of our departments has cut to the bone. We have gone without staffing increases. We've gone through each of our line items, and and we started kind of feeling like maybe we were making a turn for the better, and we were going to actually start recovering like many counties were. And then Butte Fire happened, and then tree mortality, and then winter storm, and so unfortunately, it's not like we're coming off of a period of time where we were living high off the hog. We were coming off of a period where we were already kind of scraping by with the little that we had. So the reality is there would be a huge hole. How that gets filled, I think it's just important that the board understands that has to be filled, because the reality is it is staffing. You're not going to save this much money on cutting office supplies. We don't have that much in our budgets for that. So the issue is, we really did balance this budget on the backs of that Measure C money. And if you kind of stand back and look at what just got approved at the 17-18 year budget, I think everything that happened was it was good that we did those things, but there's not a recurring funding source. The money that the board approved to go to the fire districts, that has to come from discretionary money to backfill for the sheriff's department, the money for the economic development director, the OES director. All of those positions and all of those expenditures are coming from discretionary money that we potentially aren't going to have going forward.
So Office of Emergency Services, pretty important for a county like ours.
It's
Deputies.
vitally important. I mean, we struggled through Butte Fire, and we've struggled through tree mortality, and we've struggled through winter storm. And I would hate to see us go back to anything less than what we're trying to aspire to, because we've really struggled with those.
And I would assume that if we move forward with the proposed ban, we would have to make these decisions post haste, because I assume we've got contractual relationships with our unions and others, and we'd have to tighten that belt right away.
Everything would have to happen very quickly. Basically, when we've run into situations like this where we are coming up severely short with revenue, we look to teeter. Unfortunately, as you heard at the board meeting, I believe last week, we also have cash flow issues because of the fact that this country has been under siege with declared emergencies every which way till Sunday, whether it's fire or whether it's hurricanes. And so the help that we thought that we were going to get from FEMA and Cal OES, I think is either not going to come, or there's going to be situations where it will come, but it just won't come soon. And we've got to figure out how we're going to make those funding decisions and cash flow. And so when we're looking at that, teeter is really where we would get teeter and some other internal funds that are restricted, but that we do have the availability to borrow against from a short-term standpoint. We can use those funds for borrowing purposes only, But then it seems like we just have a lot of very competing, very serious, very short-term decision-making issues that are all kind of facing us at the same time.
So the consequences are profound for
Yes.
whatever we do today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Supervisor Mills.
Yes, we came into this year's budget with how many open positions?
I
These
am
are
not
fully
sure. That
funded.
would be a question for HR.
Okay, fully funded positions that were not filled, the book's laying at home, I didn't put it in the trunk of my car this morning.
Many,
But I'd like to know what that total amount of money that was allocated that's not being spent because we have positions that are open and unfilled.
I do know many of the positions are not general fund.
That's
And
correct.
then of the general fund ones, several of them were either grant funded or restricted funding sources. So would you want her just to focus on the ones that are being funded with discretionary dollars?
Discretionary is where we have the most amount of control, as you know. But I would like to know what that total number of positions is and what that total amount represented in the budget, not necessarily just discretionary.
But we can't spend the funds
I understand that.
on restricted
I understand
funding
that.
sources.
I'm just looking for the
Okay.
total.
I don't necessarily have what the historical point in time on budget was, but I can tell you right now how many vacant positions we have because I got a report this morning from HR.
Okay.
At this point, we have 69 vacant positions across the county. Roughly 48 of those positions are in general funded departments.
Okay.
Now, when I'll affix a caveat to that, as we know from the budget hearings in June, it's difficult you have certain programs or departments that we call general funds, such as probation, that also have a fairly heavy amount of state and federal dollars in there. So it's not always going to be a dollar for dollar comparison to say reduction, but I know that 48 of those positions are in general funded departments, which total compensation for those positions, for those general funded positions, equates to roughly $3.682 million.
Thank you. Ms. Gallen, you mentioned the financial costs of struggling through the Butte fire. Could you quantify that number for us?
The total expenditures?
Yes.
To date?
Yes.
I don't remember what it was. I don't know what it is this very moment because I haven't looked at it in the last few weeks, but I think it was close to 11 point something million dollars.
I had heard something about 10.1 in our last meeting. Is that
Yeah,
still pretty close?
we had updated that. We had some additional expenditures.
Okay. Next, I know the sheriff's budget last year, or for this year in the budget, is $15.2 million. If we looked at the AB 109, AB 443, and other designated fund reserves, which are reserves available to the sheriff, can you give us a total amount of those fund reserves at this point? Or could you bring that back to us?
I could bring it back. And you're looking for AB 109 and 443?
Well, you'd mentioned to me, I think this last spring, about 4.6 million was sitting in those fund reserves.
We'd have to look at it. It would have been part of the budget packet that went to the board as well.
Right. I'm just trying to be sure that we have a full scope of what the budgetary situation is available for the sheriff's department. If we start cutting into, we still have some other reserves that are sitting out there that could potentially be used if they needed to be used.
443 and 109 both house the planting language, so you wouldn't be able to supplant.
It's not 100.
Then 109 is highly, highly restricted with regards to what it can do, and it's actually the CCP that makes the recommendations as to how those funds would be spent. The AB 443 is a fund that the sheriff's departments, generally it's a rural sheriff's grant that they get that's there to supplement law enforcement services. So historically what the sheriff's department's been doing is purchasing capital costs out of their equipment, but I can bring you that balance.
Yeah, I think that we need to know how much is available in reserves, not so much for probation or for other pieces, which also take AB 109 funds as well, but just to know what that total reserve capacity is as we look at our decision. Lastly, if we could take all of the marijuana-funded positions, and I'm not talking just about the Sheriff's Department, but code enforcement, environmental health, everybody who has put a position into this pie, could you come up with the total of all of those marijuana positions and how much they were funded in, say, last year's budget?
I'd have to look. I know what was funded for this budget was
Yes.
the entire balance of the 2.7 million, which included all of those positions funded for the full fiscal year.
Yes, I was familiar with this year because we'd had that conversation, but I also wanted to look at last year to see what that trending was, whether we, what we had funded actually in there versus what did we end up with, if that's possible. And that's all I have. I probably have some further questions later. Thank you.
So that information we can get after
Yeah, I
lunch?
can go.
Would
Yeah,
that
yeah.
work, Ms. Callan?
I have one other number.
Supervisor
that-
Tofinelli.
Yes, I'd like.
Tofinelli, I'm sorry.
George. I have one other number that I would like you to bring, if you're going to come back with those numbers, is we appropriated funding for the winter storms damage and for tree mortality, that those programs we may not this year be able to get into, as you were speaking of FEMA and state OAS. Can you bring back the figures of how much that appropriated money is in those, for those? Okay, thank you.
Is there any board questions of Ms. Callan? Further questions or staff questions of Ms. Callan? Ms. Callan, would it be possible if we could call on you again
Yeah.
later today?
Yep.
I
And
hate
if-
to interrupt your schedule, but this is a pretty important issue.
And if I could add, I looked up as we were sitting here, we were both, it was a little off on where we were on the actual urgency ordinances 2.059, not
Okay.
2.7. I know. I was thinking it too, so we were both having a moment.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for responding.
2.059 was what was remaining at year close, which then was budgeted for this year.
Sheriff, you had comments you want to make?
Okay. Nope, I'm done.
And just so you know, Rebecca and I get along great. And we really do. And I'm not being facetious. We actually resolved our problem. She went to Bret Harte. I came from Calaveras. It's just a difference of opinions. In answer to your question, Chair Oliveira, asset forfeiture costs, Sheriff's Office gets 65%. District Attorney gets 10%. State gets 24%. And CDAA gets 1%.
I knew somebody got 25% out of that.
Well, you were close, 24. And for clarification, Mr. Mills, the marijuana positions that you're talking about, you got to remember that because of the restructuring of the program and the way funds were being divvied out, that 2-point-some-odd million that's still left in that account is monies for regulatory processes. 80% is coming out of general fund for my marijuana team because most of what they're doing, 80% of what they're doing is coming out of the enforcement side. So that's not monies that's available out of that fund. That was, remember, the discrepancy that Rebecca and I had at one point. So
Yeah, and to your point, I did write your 80% number down.
Okay.
Is trying to understand exactly what are your true costs for marijuana-related activities. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's related to the application process. It might be because of enforcement, prosecution, or arresting, or whatever you're doing that is not part of the application process, and that we need to know what those numbers are as well.
Okay, well, the problem with that is the district attorney hasn't been involved in any of this. She's not receiving any funds whatsoever out of the regulatory program because that wasn't part of the process. And as far as the extra work that they're doing and the extra help that they're getting to process and prosecute the marijuana side, there's no way for her to track that because it's all over the board. she's got so many different people doing so many different things, some related to marijuana, some not, and because she's not needing to track that, it's just a prosecution for her. So, and I don't want to speak for her, but in some of the conversations that I've had with her, it's hard for her to track that.
Maybe the better question to ask of you, sir, is tell me what the number is on non-Prop 26.
Well, and that's what I just told you earlier. Just this year alone, okay, from June of 16 to January of 17, just in salaries, we spent $330,000 on labor alone for the marijuana enforcement.
And that's not Prop 26?
That's not Prop 26.
Okay.
That was the Measure C funds that we used for. Between January and October 12th, we used $520,000. So basically, you're looking at, you know, a year and a half's worth of gross season, and it's cost you $950,000, damn near $1 million. And it will top over $1 million for those 2 seasons. That's just in salaries alone, non-Prop 26 funding.
Because we have to understand what is regulatory under the application process and what's not Prop 26.
Right.
As we discussed before, and we need to have that total number and an understanding of that total number when we go forward.
Oh, there's your number, $1 million.
I've got it written down right here.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then you brought up my AB 443 money. I get a little touchy with AB 443 money. That's non-discretionary money that the county or that the state gives the rural sheriff's departments to use for what they've needed. There is an account that has been set aside that I will give Captain Macedo all the credit for. He's been putting money aside from that. And back in 2009, there was some cuts that were going to be made, and Sheriff Downham at the time took those funds, and Mr. Toffanelli is very aware of this. Sheriff Downham took those funds and was paying salaries out of those funds, which he can do. It's non-discretionary money. So since 2009, we have 4 positions tied to AB 443 money. You folks gave me that money back this year so that I can use it for what we need it for. We did our RIMS information program. It's a computer program, cost $500,000. We paid for that out of 443 money, so it wasn't an impact to the county. We've purchased vehicles this year out of those monies so that it's not an impact to the county. If you start taking that money and saying, hey, this is non-discretionary money, we can use it for other things, you're going to kill me. You're going to kill the sheriff's department. Those are funds that we can utilize for some of the things that you all can't give us. Don't take my 443 money, please.
Well, you remember that when we were talking in negotiations earlier in the year, that I had asked a question of what percentage of reserve funds would be reasonable for your department. And so that still has to be in the conversation. As you look at a budget, you have to also say, well, what have I got in the bank, and what have I got, you know, where is the cash available or going to be available has got to be part of that decision. And so I don't want to extend this conversation. I'm just trying to be sure that there's a clear understanding that there are reserve funds, not that they need to be used right now, but we just need to know they're there.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Is there any other staff member that wishes to present on this agenda item? I have a request, Mr. Short. May you approach the podium, please? I have questions regarding code compliance.
Good morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ed Short. He is in charge of our building department, which code compliance is part of. Mr. Short, how's your staffing right now regarding a marijuana team?
Well, we have 3 dedicated code enforcement officers just for cannabis. If you look at the budget, we have some part-time, which equates to about 5.6, 5.7 FTE. The cannabis budget has been transferred over to the CO's office. This next year, we budgeted approximately about 900. I think, Tim, maybe about $1 million. That includes about or $500,000. I don't have all the numbers, but $500,000 in staffing, about $500,000 in abatement costs. So we haven't encroached on that because I came to the board for the contracts with the two, about $500,000. But we're getting a lot of self-abatement processes, which I have posted a lot of statistics and what we're doing on the website, and I think I handed that to the board earlier and the staff. If this is what we have done as of, well, again, Friday the 13th, same numbers. This doesn't include the criminal parts that we eradicate. This is just the part for the emergency ordinance, the regulatory side of it. If you look at the data, it's pretty impressive. We've had county orders of abate about 30, county abated about 19, volunteer abatements 159 through the whole process. Processed cannabis is about 220 pounds. Not the same as the sheriff's. They're in there doing a whole lot more criminal. The approximate county abated plant count is 21,491 plants. Approximate volunteer plant count is 23,028. The total plant count is 44,419 plants. That's huge. And the approximate fines through their administrative hearing process is about $551,000 as we speak right now. The citations per district, in District 1 we have about 42 citations. Again, District 2, 120, District 3, 10, District 4, 25, District 5, 25, split, borderline's about 2. That's 224 total citations on so far have we as today. And this is just ramping up. Right now, with the staff we're doing right now, it is a huge workload to go back and start doing the re-inspections for the registered grows. We're just starting to do that. What is left there is once we do the eradications, we have a lot of existing code violations, which is a regular code abatement. We're going to be starting to roll that out, but we only have really one person part-time working on that, which it does take quite a bit of time to get back to. We've calculated about 150 sites that we have to go back to. We're going to try to go after maybe about 20 this year. That equates to about $2.1 million of abatement process that we had calculated, about $14,000 per site just to go clean up after the eradications. We predict that the 150 might take 2 to 3 years maybe to try to go back to do it. So we're just starting to roll out that program along with the emergency ordinance regulation. So hopefully that kind of gives you an update of what we're doing. I feel the staff is a really good staff. They work really well with the sheriffs. We've done combined criminal and standby. So it's a really good system working now. I think we're getting the bugs out of it, and we're moving forward with more eradications as we speak right now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shorten. Sir, how is your department funded?
It's right now an enterprise fund, which means on the non-abatement side for cannabis. Cannabis is a separate fund that comes through, as you know, the monies that we use for there, that's a separate but it's through permits, it's through user fees and user funds, so that's how we operate. But the cannabis side is a separate fund. It's the 10-10-10-10 fund, which we budgeted approximately $1 million this year, about equivalent to what the sheriff was talking about, to try to for the next fiscal year.
You took over the controls of that department just recently.
Yes, sir.
And at that time, I understand we had a pretty good backlog of regular building department code compliance issues.
Yes, sir.
And you've increased your staff due to the marijuana enforcement team.
Correct.
How are we doing on the other side of that fence?
That side, well, just like similar, if the priorities, we are looking at all the priorities, that side suffers because most of the cannabis side of it is inundated or bled over into our regular code enforcement. So there we have 2 code enforcement officers, more than 50% just going back dedicated to the cannabis side. They're about 30%, maybe 20% on one staff member working on regular code enforcement. AVA is which abandoned vehicles. We've got about a few of that. So we're really just down to not even one FTE on the regular side of. So you can see that the timelines to go after those code enforcement abatements is going to take quite a bit of time. So we're suffering on that side, especially.
Thank you, sir. Any question, Mr. Short? Supervisor Garamendi?
Thank you very much, Ed, for coming up. And just so you know, your work is being noticed. When I go to RCRC meetings and they see what our code is doing, with their resources to knock out some of these illegal grows, it's very much appreciated, especially some of the quick abatement hearings that are going on, shortening up the timeline. A lot of people are looking and see what we've learned as we've bumped into every piece of furniture walking into the room.
Right.
What the route actually is through the room. You have 44,000 plants that your team has cut down this year. I would guess that's somewhere around $44 million worth of cannabis coming off the street, and illegal cannabis out of circulation. So thank you very much. You've got a great team that you've trained, that have been trained and have become experts in this. You have 3 members of that team. What happens under a ban to those
Well, if they're
members?
under the 1010 fund, that funding will go away. Most likely, those positions would be.
So these
be
highly
lost.
trained, now efficient team would be dismantled.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your work.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Further questions of Mr. Short by the board?
I just had one more, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead, sir.
I asked a question of the sheriff as well. How long, under current funding, would it take you to get this under control? Never saying 100%, but feel like we've got a grip on illegal cannabis grows.
Just to be totally transparent, I've been here about 5 months, and we're just starting to see performing in this program, and we're just getting started, and it's getting really fine. I think with the sheriff and this team that's really, really good, and the hearing officers, it'll probably take another 2 to 3 years before we start getting a handle on it. But every day we're getting more complaints and more illegal grows, and we're getting a handle, and we're getting a system in place that's just more refined and better. So it'll take about 2 or 3 years before we
Under a ban, I get a phone call or I call into your office and say, illegal grow, there's a grow here. What happens?
Well, if we're down to the original staff, we would just do like same as the sheriff. We'd have to have part-time folks working on it, and we would have to prioritize what is more of a life safety issue versus something that isn't, and we would go out and do it. The timeline would take longer to go out and do it, but if we would still go out and
Eventually.
address it eventually. Yes.
Eventually. Thank you.
Thank you for responding, Mr. Short. Appreciate your cooperation.
Thank you.
Is there any other staff member that would like to present? Mr. Maurer, your presentation, is there any questions you may have of the board?
No, I have nothing else.
Council? Council? Ladies and gentlemen, seeing we have a lot of people here, we're going to break for lunch a little early so everybody can run down and get a sandwich and get back. So let's see if we can get back here by 1:15. Would that work? Staff, any objections? We'll be back at 1:15.